There was once a land where everyone was born yesterday, but believed it happened today. This gave rise to certain unanswerable questions. And now for some transcendental vaudeville news. It's not only mind readers who know what you're thinking. There was once a man who refused to carry a timepiece of any kind. He said that when he did, he always felt like they were watching him. No matter what specific local names men may give to their feelings of estrangement, their overall sensation is one of being somehow in conflict with the environment. Reflect on this, O ye of additional stuff crammed in your skull. Feeling as though you're in conflict with your own natural surroundings. What a trip, what a gas, what a trick, what a gag. And the really funny thing is, it works. No. There was once a ruler who wanted to hide a secret treasure for the people to discover. But since his kingdom was split in half, he had to hide it in two places. One man walked stooped over for a while to try and improve his posture. Here is an example of an item, of an idea that can be taken in two distinct fashions. One, as an apparent criticism if applied to ordinary men and their actions, but two, as a potentially useful tool if used by the exceptional. This is in part why it's so gosh darn difficult in the beginning for would-be mystics to find a dependable mystical supply store. But this is also why it's ultimately so gosh darn pleasurable when the would-beer discovers that there's no place to look but to himself. Well, just gosh darn it. For many years, one man believed he was beset by invisible imps and demons. Then he progressed to a point instead of seeing them as the food on his table. His brother then told him he was crazy and should see a psychiatrist who could properly place his problems where they truly belonged, in his head. All of this troubled the man greatly, and he pined for the days when he was simply beset by imps and demons. One reason that many dissatisfied people never stray far from home is that they're afraid that they'll even be more upset someplace else. Don't you see how easy it is for life to keep men corralled without the need for a physical corral? While laying on the floor looking through some printed material, a young boy stopped, looked up to his father, and announced, "When I grow up, I want to be just like life." In at least one area do the simple elude the confines inherent in their own description: conspiracies. The simple always dream of being victim of conspiracies that are of the most complex nature possible. Whilst if indeed there are such, similar to those they imagine, they would in fact be quite simplistic as befitting the requirements of the circumstances. In fact, beyond all that, would be an overall principle to wit: the great conspiracy is a simple conspiracy. Nothing more is needed. Every time this one guy would hear repeated the old adage, "Never send a boy to do a man's job," his mind would bristle up and say, "You shouldn't let him talk about me like that." On one planet with thinking creatures, their history went like this. For the first 1,000,000 years, they all believed they were sick in some way. And for the next 1,000,000, up to the present that is, they stayed that way. Yeah, I know what you're thinking. Gosh, aren't we lucky not to live in such a place? Right. And now, due to popular demand, for the sake of clarification, tonight's mental health tip. Wanting to get better is all the proof needed that you are ill. On the main road to the prize, little counseling is available. In every reality, each time life drives another atom from the garden, it gives him a secret map regarding where he is to go. I say a secret map, though in truth it was not so originally, but always turns out to seem that way to every atom's succeeding generations. Look not, intrepid traveler, with 2 eyes to man's recorded past, and ponder for whom the future tolls. For you are the genetic infinity of all realities, both now and for always. And to the keen of eyes the secret map imprinted thereon. One father had 2 sets of children at home, and one group of them played upstairs all of the time, making a lot of noise and always moving things around, while the other bunch stayed down in the basement and were all the time starting fires and knocking things over. Oftentimes this one man would go to bed with one person and wake up with another, but not often enough, he said. There was once a mystical order of knights who waged their search for the Holy Grail based on physical maps and literal directions. According to legend, they finally got so good at it, they began to get so close to it that they abandoned all maps and directions. One day at home alone, a man shivered and said to himself, "Is it cold in here or is it just me?" And his mind mused, "No matter what the first part of such questions are, the answer is always the same. Yes, it is just you. Always just you." But it tried not to move loud enough for the man to hear. A viewer writes, on your last program you read a news item that said that every time life just about had this one man cornered, he'd commit suicide again. Well, I like the basic concept I perceive therein, but do not like the man's execution thereof. So I'd like to ask, do you think in my particular case, whenever I find myself in such a relative position to life, that instead of suicide I could maybe just dye my hair or change my name or something like that? There is a certain quite commendable attribute of life which usually goes unnoticed, and that is that life will generally let you pay whatever amount you want to for whatever it is you think you're a-wanting. Do you realize that if things were any fairer than they are now, you'd probably be even more pissed than you already are? A frightening possibility to ponder. Combined hunters and preys tip. A trapped animal, if it doesn't move, can't be seen. Yep. Tally-ho, young neurons. Tally-ho, I say. The simple find fault with the body. The more sophisticated find fault with the mind. While the alert simply find fault with being either of the two. Why do you think their efforts are known as transcendental? And in fact, the word transcendental being the superior synonym for the future. One guy had a little song he'd sometimes sing. Oh, duality comes and duality goes, but mostly it just hangs around all the time. He says he guesses it's a blues. Well, as opposed to, say, an upbeat, inspirational song. One guy finally tried to make a deal with himself. He said to himself, look, if I'm still here in the same place 10 years from now, you don't have to speak to me ever again. And himself saw no reason not to go along with this, but also saw no purpose in it, which is exactly what the man was hoping for. While laying on the floor, poring over some news reports, a young lad paused, looked up to his father, and asked, well, if it turns out that when I grow up I can't be as smart as life is, you think it's possible I might become as smart as I am? And the old man replied, anything's possible, I suppose. One writer on the mythical quest, taking the idea of being a warrior to heart, listed himself on his calling card as the ballistic Mallistic. He says that besides the words having a nice ring to them, he also finds them appropriate to any description he might actually make of himself. That is, at first, It might sound like it means something and makes sense, but then after you think about it for a moment, you're not sure it means anything at all. The ballistic. I was warned. The ordinary say, I eat, I sleep, I breathe and daydream, I help keep the race going and do my recycling share in the food chain. What more do you ask? And indeed, no more is demanded of routine man, and to believe otherwise is to invite unnecessary agitation, if you're ordinary. The final speaker at the recent Outlaw Medical Convention had this to say: the true cause of all weight problems and digestive disorders is seriousness. And after a momentary silence, someone in the audience reacted, but isn't that true of all uniquely human ills? And everyone there was glad, in fact, that they'd chosen to attend the non-sanctioned conclave. Hey, said one practitioner, how else you going to learn? Attempting to discover the secret in everyday life is like trying to find a needle in a needle stack. And a fellow says, it's about time we got some encouraging news. There was once a certain knightly order who, when laying siege and would deplete their munition supplies, would resort to hurling at the structure under assault the bodies of any among them who seemed temporarily serious. What ho, young warriors! Talk about your strong motivational factor. One student of such affairs, after many years of study and reflection, finally came to a day where he sat and considered the matter thusly: if it's true that the prize, the Holy Grail, that real men seek is not a physical object, then it could also be that it is, and that it is the seekers who are not physically real. Perceiving maps as distinct from locations is as foolish as mistaking words for reality. Definition: discouragement. Road work being done on the mental highway sufficient to keep the simple on the road. Mass mythology update. Ever since man's imagined first flood, he stood around awaiting the next one. A gentleman wrote the Slash and Burn doctor, "Dear doctor, are things going downhill as fast as they seem, or in fact even faster?" And the doctor replied, "Dear sir, there are actually two questions at work here. One regards the matter of speed, and the other regards what you believe you're gauging. And what is involved is the fact that the tempo of your mind equals the speed you perceive, and the things you perceive to be clocking are reflections of your mind." And the writer held his poor head while regretting that he had asked. As he lay on the floor carefully studying certain self-proclaimed important metaphysical documents, a boy raised up his head and to his father said, "If it be, as I continue to read, that the truth hurts, then why do I feel no pain as these pages I pursue?" As he approached the new city, he passed a series of roadside signs, placed some distance apart, which sequentially read, "Thinking equals fear." And then the next one, thinking equals anger. Thinking equals guilt. Thinking equals discomfort. Thinking equals uncertainty. And then one that proclaimed, thinking equals all human suffering. And he began to wonder just what he was walking into. One guy scoffed at local conditions. "I can hold out as long as you can," to which they replied, "Maybe, but you better not let our cousin stupidity hear you say that." Today's Ponder Pod. Would even promising mystics ever get actually involved in the mystical if it didn't start off seeming much more mystical than it actually is. It is, of course, your privilege to not want to think about or answer this, which will, of course, reveal your response. Only irretrievable weirdos are irretrievably attracted to weirdness. The direct sighting of everyday life is stranger than anything ordinarily imagined. Man's intellectual conflicts are not made to settle, but rather to produce additional conflicts. One father's advice to the kid: save yourself some energy. If you're going to work in the dark anyway, go ahead and close your eyes. Some good news, I guess, if you live in the city. A man with a bag full of cliches has as good a chance as anyone of being taken for an intellectual. All self-reference serves to reinforce one's sense of duality. One guy's motto was, "Oh, no, you don't," which was in response to laughs of, "Oh, yes, I do." Only the ordinary think of perception as being separate from ordinary reality. One tale tells that when man became the creature that he is today, local conditions dictated that he either be right or left-handed, which in one case would cause him to be mute but relatively happy, and in the other deaf and continually perturbed. One man somehow ended up with a job of writing material for Life, and got so good at it that Life allowed him to disappear. The name of that other hot new band is Never Get a Mystic Drunk or Confused. Every king worthy his title rules over two realms. The mind talks a good game, but instinct was born playing it. It is said there was once a knightly order who believed that if you truly undertook to kill yourself, at your very last second of life, you would suddenly know the secret. The hungers of man's lower nervous system can be satisfyingly fed, but not those of his upper. From thus comes progress. They wanted to do a fictionalized version of one man's life, but he said it was too late. He had already done it. The mind does not operate in a world of resolvable issues. Sci-fi and oh my update. Men waste their energy trying to construct a physical time machine. The reality of such already exists in their own genes. Religion, all you need to know. The blind worship, the sighted see. Those still laboring with standard issue minds tend to either look too far away or else too close up. One man had so much fun with it that he declared, "Even if there is no life after death, I'm still coming back." Offline note, all forms of what men call ignorance exist in their own particular time zones. Twin brothers once decided to embark on a certain adventure. They decided that each one would watch and study the other one. And more specifically, the first one would watch and study the second one's physical activities, while the second one would observe and study the first one's mental doings. But just about the time they thought they about had it all up and running good, their father called for both of them to come on back inside of him. For the sake of stability and orderly progression, life periodically causes someone with charisma and a loud voice to appear and winningly reaffirm that ordinary consciousness is all there is. And now for our interdenominational fool's test, which consists of but one question. Do you believe anything that anybody says? Definition relative to the great mental, whatever you call it. Sleep. A weak man's temporary way out. Most men are adequately entertained by the life of their body. A few want more and muck about pleasantly and harmlessly with their mind. Then there's yet another, even smaller group, whose threshold of satisfaction is of such non-standard height as to require the implementation of additional non-standard approaches. Having fun, a residential-based poem. You can frolic upstairs or cavort in the basement, but if you get real good, you can go outside and play. All kitty warriors believe that the enemy is harbored within. Whenever he'd hear the idea of there being some secret, the knowledge of which would answer all questions, this one man would think to himself, how can this be? Is there one food that a man can eat which will forever satisfy all hunger? On its face it seemed so impossible and irrational, and yet he couldn't shake the notion completely from his mind. After many fruitful years on the trail of the Grail, as he began to feel himself drawing close thereto, a knight said to himself, boy, that's all I need, just when things are going well, to actually find the damn thing. To try and get even, one guy began thinking of mystics as being simply comedians without a punchline. If you recall, last time we were talking about, I was responding to the many letters that come in having to do with questions about people suffering. And I was pointing out that there is a unrecognized, very simple basis of all human suffering. And we're not talking about physical ills. We're talking about the unique forms of human suffering. Without a mind, there is no suffering. But it's not simply to say that the mind causes suffering. The source of all suffering is based upon the reality of a dual nature in man. And as I was pointing out, even on a wider physical, observable scale, which should answer a multitude, if you wanted them answered actually, of unanswerable questions regarding the historical and even contemporaneous questionable behavior of man, is the fact that any time, any place you have dualities, you have conflict. That is, if you take any group, two groups of people that mutually identify themselves as being separate on whatever basis, and you put them side by side, they will ultimately be in conflict. It is the nature that man has two groups of mutually identifiable kingdoms or realms within him. His older, basic, biological, physical, instinctive self, and the newer, relatively speaking, but the newer, psychological, mental self. And we've already covered the fact that no matter what terms I might use in the beginning, the reality of there being a duality to man's nature is accepted, promoted, used by every sane creature on this planet and always has been, going all the way from such terms in the religious context of man having a good and an evil nature, into psychological realm of man having a conscious mind and an unconscious mind, into the more sociological, political arena of saying man has certain civilized, charitable, humane inclinations, but they are in conflict with is more selfish, brutish, feral drives. So the reality is there. There are extreme differences once you get past the ordinary admission to there being a duality. Because in the ordinary realm, about where we left off last time, I was pointing out to you that in the ordinary realm, in all forms of conflict, all perceived forms of conflict, whether it be in the religious mode that I just described, or if it be in the psychological, such as in the religious. All people who are religious absolutely acknowledge that there is a duality to man, a good and an evil side, and they certainly propose that the good side win, that one side is supposed to triumph. In the same way with psychology or any non-clerical context, they would say that in the struggle between man's conscious drives, mind, motivation, and his unconscious form of it, that for him to actually reach a place of anything resembling mental equilibrium or health, the conscious should triumph. It's the whole point of psychological counseling or psychiatric analysis, is to bring out, they believe, the unconscious, to bring them from the unconscious realm, the silent realm, into the conscious, and therefore the conscious then will absorb them. It will take an upper hand, and a man will be in better shape. When I say an extreme difference now, when you get into the transcendental world, such as this, a man knows better. It's not a matter of one triumphing over the other, because if it could, it would be suicidal. It would be death to man as he is. You're faced with a kind of situation that I wrote a news item last time that I didn't get around to commenting on, that said that one guy said about the insects that set upon him that he received no enjoyment from killing them, from a mosquito, from anything, that he derived no pleasure from killing it. But he also noted that he was positive that the insect itself was not biting on him, seeking some form of pleasure itself or enjoyment. All in all, thought he, the insect is doing exactly as it must do, what it should do, and I no less. It is driven to bite me, I am driven to slap it, to kill it, to get rid of it. Now, in the sense of there being this kind of conflict which produces all forms of identified, proclaimed suffering, is based upon this internal conflict, and the conflict being as natural as it is for man to be man, it being inescapable. That once you have a duality, you have a conflict. It's not a matter of maybe, if, you will. That's that. So the conflict is there, it was inescapable to start with, and it is not unnatural. If you get past the point of believing that one should triumph, and need I point out the obvious? Perhaps. Are you going to? You betcha. Do note, just as an aside, that although psychology, political reformers, social reformers of all stripes, and the religious, in their belief that one of the two sides in the dual nature of man, that one of the sides is due to, should triumph over the other for the good of man. Do notice this, that one side is not any closer to triumphing over the other than it ever has been. And also note, as always with all good interesting info, that it could not be more obvious I'll make a clean simile. I was going to do one, and I won't even tell you what I was going to do. It could not, that the kind of information that could not also be more obvious, that things have not, it's not any closer to good triumphing over evil, or man's conscious mind over his unconscious, or political justice overcoming political injustice and social injustice. It's no closer, which that's one thing, but the really interesting part to notice is that nobody notices. Well, I thought it was interesting. If that's the way you feel, then now I wish I'd given you the simile I started to, which would have the censors back bleeping. Oh. No side is going to triumph. No side is supposed to triumph, but ordinary minds, or since they are based on a duality themselves, have no other recourse but to believe that one should triumph. And therefore you have, as tonight pointed out, that there was one man who had two sets of children. And one played upstairs, one played down in the basement. And the group upstairs were noisy and they're always, moving things around. Don't have to take apart my own metaphors. And the other group stayed in the basement. And the ones that played and frolicked down there, they were always setting fires and knocking things over. According to where you're living, according to where you are at any particular time in such a structure, you do believe that one side should triumph. If you understand that that is the nature of man, that one side is not going to triumph and everybody's playing where they should and they are frolicking about in the manner appropriate to them, regardless of what other people inside the building say, regardless of what outside observers may try to note, inside everything is just right. Now when you understand that, when you see that, then you're left, I'll go ahead and do it for you, you'd be left with the question of, well, what to do about the conflict. Just because you're saying it's natural, that does not mean that it's tolerable to an exceptional person. To ordinary people, it's tolerable. That's one reason they bitch and whine about it. But you understand now, I'm assuming we're speaking of someone with a slightly higher aim. If you understand that that's a natural condition, then and that whining and bitching about it is not going to change anything, but you also understand that being, in a sense, this continual backdrop or battleground upon which this inevitable conflict is continually played out, and you think, well, okay, and Jesus, I gave them 30 or 40, 50 years, whatever they want. They've had a beautiful place, good and evil, the conscious and the subconscious, the just and the injustice of life. I've let those mother friggers play through my field. They've played in my house. They've cut up my field. They've dug up my backyard. They've tromped through the wet cement. I have been, if I may say so, metaphorically speaking, a not too ungracious host for these chowderheads tromping through my place for, however many years you care to think about, 20 or 30 or whatever. So then let's say that you are a person that finally develops a certain higher level of expectations, and you decide enough's enough. So then what are you going to do if one side's not going to triumph? I was going to use a comparison between my man and his observation of how he had to treat the insects, the lice, the bloodsuckers, but just the insects, I don't mean it insultingly, like a mosquito that beset him. There's nothing more natural to a mosquito than to land on a nice fleshy piece of human flesh and to drink therefrom. It's the way they live. The humans are part of their natural food source. So there is nothing at all unnatural about the mosquito taking you to be a very inexpensive buffet. And in the same sense that the man I was trying to give the widest expansion, he received no joy when he saw it was, and he knew, well, I'm about to hit it and kill it. He point out to himself, well, I get no joy out of this. I'm not doing it for fun. But then he took his final rap was that he understood that there was a quite similar connection. There is a connection, when I say quite similar, is the connection on a coin between heads and tails, you understand. It's the connection between any dualities. It's the inseparable nexus between any two parties to a conflict. That the mosquito had no more choice. The mosquito, in biting him, was doing exactly as it had to. It had to bite him or somebody to stay alive. There he was. So it was doing as it had to, but he also noted that by me doing that, even being aware before I do it, that I'm about to kill it and I hate to. That's not I'm not enjoying it, but the mosquito bit me as it had to. It only did as it should. And I, by doing this, do no less. To take that into the area of how you're going to handle what seems to be this endless, if you finally see it, appears to be this endless internal conflict. No one has triumphed. You've had 20 or 30 years. Don't worry about man having 40 or 50,000 to observe it. How about you? Better than that, screw history. You've had 20 or 30 or 40 years to observe that I have danced with me. I have tangled with me. I have done the Apache dance with me, for those of you. That's like the tango It's like a rough version of the tango. Verging on spousal abuse. I have wrestled with me. I have tried to reason with me. We're talking on the basis now of the internal conflict. I have tried to soothe me. I have tried to appease me. I have threatened me. I have even made phony baloney treaties with me that both of us signed. But after 30 or 40 years, if you have any eyesight left at all, which by then if you have any, it is keener than ever, the day finally comes that you just have to see things as they are. The conflict stands. The parties stand with the same kind of weighted relationship of strength as they did when I started, or when I first became aware of it. Nothing has changed. You could take that same kind of attitude that one would toward the infestation of one's house. You find yourself living at a place, you find yourself in residence at a place in which rats show up. You've got two possibilities. Either abandon the place or eradicate the rats. Should we take a vote and see who would like for me to try and wrap that up? You know, like just maybe one or two more sentences, make that just a bit clearer how that fits into the other? No. No. Moving on, there was something else that I was mentioning. I made a little... There's a thing about the duality. It is there and it's natural. Which, if you see that, then you would probably perhaps appreciate some of my superficial humor throughout these tapings that I've apparently made, if you looked at it from a simplistic level, sarcastic fun of, or I've jibed at health, saying things like, you know, screw health, it's not a hobby. Or I had the guy that came up, decided recently that his attitude toward health was quite simple. He got down to simple thing. He decided, he told his friends, hey, if I get sick, kill me. All of that has to do with the fact that, again, we're discounting all physical ills because they're nothing. That's old Uncle Albert. You either get well or you don't get well, so there you are. No sweat. Nothing to worry about. It's these others, it's the Auntie Elizabeth disruptions of living over there. That's the kind of ills, that is the mental agitation, not the physical ills, but what appears to be the physical ills. It is those that seem to set up on a man at the age of 4 or 5 and stay with him until he dies. They never get any better, they never get any worse, and I'm not talking about any clinically diagnosed neuroses or psychoses. We're not talking about actual so-called mental illness, just being an ordinary, sane, everyday person who may never even use terms such as I have a mental problem, etc. But the mind is never placated. The mind is never still, and it never reaches any degree of satisfaction resembling that of the stomach after a good meal or one's private parts after a good screw. There is no such satisfaction. There is no such calming to it. There is no such natural peace and satisfaction available to the mind. So you are, as soon as you become conscious, as soon as you become mentally conscious, which is at whatever age you did, it was only then that you could actually be called a human. But from that time on, you are aware of an internal conflict to some degree. There is no peace. So the conflict, being naturally synonymous with a duality of any nature, I was also pointing out tonight in several different stories, and one of them directly, that besides this duality being there and being real, it is also possible to reinforce it, which of course once you see it is exactly what you do not want to do. With an ordinary person, it's neither there nor here. according to whether you live on the West Coast or... It's irrelevant. But if it is no longer an irrelevant problem to you, that you are no longer satisfied with that kind of internal conflict, then you should have some concern over anything that reinforces it. The news item, the one that I took time to actually write out tonight, was that all forms of self-reference reinforce the sensation of duality. We've hit on this several times about from whence cometh. I always do it sort of as an aside, but then I turn around and say whatever I'm talking about, and I'll point out, have you ever considered from what was the original source for the idea of humility? Of people claiming that they do not want to talk about themselves. It's just generally referred to as humility in the religious context, and it has some value amongst the non-religious. That people say, well, it's good for a man to be humble. The upper classes, royalty, has normally throughout the centuries, more sophisticated people have tried to teach the claim that they see value in and tried to teach their children, do not be vain, do not be, at least publicly, vainglorious, that a real person, a true gentleman, a true lady, does not speak about oneself, does not blow one's own clarinet or tuba. Or thank God play their own accordion. But some forms of vanity are more tolerable than others, of course, according to your tolerance for non-musical music. I won't tell you that one either. All forms of self-reference, I suggest to you, like everything that has become part of collective conventional wisdom, has, to put it crudely, had a mystical, had a transcendental origin. The idea that it's good to be humble is not religious. That's not where it came from. It's not to please the gods. It's not the fact that once it does fall into the mango machinery of ordinary thought, it comes out as being that God does not like humans to be vain because it's some way an affront to him. Well, you people got some touchy gods here on this planet. Every time I re-quote some of this, I think, you know, I mean, that's the kind of gods you know you can't hardly leave out in the rain; they might melt. You can't hardly just drive by in a car and go. You know, it might ruin their day. At any rate, the origins of all these ideas, all the way from the religious that God does not want people to be vain, He wants them to be humble, and then they explain it by several ways. It's, you know, just usually that you should not be competing with God, which is even funny if you think about it. But if you got gods that you know, that they're always in danger of their creations, being mistaken for them or about to overthrow them, yeah. Well, all the way from that to the non-religious context, as I was saying, of just humane, humanist-type people saying that it is most worthy, most decorous to a real man or woman to not be vain, to act humble, even though you might be the social superior of everyone in a group in which you were associating at some particular time. You might be able to buy and sell them all from the change in your back pocket, that it still ill befits a true man or woman, true lady or gentleman, to rub it in, to even make it known. The reality behind all that, the source of it, I was going to suggest to you, of why that strikes everyone from the religious to just ordinary people, if you make some comment that it's better, or if you say that a real warrior, a mythical knight, a real warrior is not vain. He does not brag, he does not strut, he does not go around telling all the local villagers all these great war stories. If he actually has experienced it, if he is a true experienced warrior, that's enough. Those kind of stories, and people, it strikes. Just about everyone, under the right conditions, they think, yeah. They even feel like that's what I should do. It just feels right. The reason it feels right is that if people actually did that, it would be shaking the foundations of the sensation of duality. Because every time you refer to yourself, it reinforces the sensation. Now notice I keep saying sensation. The reality is there, so you do not have to actually reinforce the reality. A man does not invent, he does not produce, he does not conjure up this duality in him. It is born in him. So it is not necessary that it be reinforced. It's not necessary for you to help support it any more than the same way that your guides need your support. It does not need support. But every time you engage in self-reference, you are supporting your own sensation of it. Again, I repeat as always, with ordinary minds, with ordinary people, this is neither here nor there. It does them no harm. Contraire, they need to do it. It helps facilitate what is routinely referred to as good mental health, just being sane and stable, to get by, to stumble by for 60 years. But if you are attempting to in some way elude this conflict, to transcend it, then there is a danger. That's not a danger, it's a problem. That is, I don't want to make it sound like it's potential, is every time you engage in self-reference, you are reinforcing the stranglehold. That is the sensation of this duality. And the sensation of the duality also carries with it a feeling of its propriety. Now remember, not that people do not want to get rid of it, but they think that being there is propitious enough because one side's going to win. Whereas if you begin to understand anything, you understand neither side's going to win. That's not the reason the conflict's going on. In fact, conflict is a horrible misnomer, but I could think of even horribler ones, so we went with that one. It is a horrible misnomer. No one's going to win. No one is supposed to win. But if you can see anything at all, you realize that the problem is not one side winning or not winning, or one side losing. The problem is, can I escape from this? Is there something beyond this? And of course there is, or you wouldn't be able to see it. That is, assuming you can see it on your own. So there is something beyond that. Even the one little spot, the one little ephemeral, temporary spot that you may, in passing, occupy, at least long enough, firm enough that you can glance around and realize this is all mostly bullshit going on inside of me. Being the charitable sort you are, I know you'd probably say mostly. So from that one spot wherein you can make such an observation, then you know, you have your own certainty that there is a possibility beyond that, or you would not be able to observe it. After that point, there is a problem. Because then, if you reach that point, you're not an ordinary person. You're not operating from an ordinary mental view. So then there is a problem that every time you engage in self-reference, you are nailing your feet stronger to the floor. You're pouring more glue on top of them, more sand on top of your feet. You are reinforcing the sensation of this duality. You're in effect that you've got a glimpse of something, and then every time, if you turn right around, it's one of these good old, apparently non sequiturs, but as you get a glimpse of what's going on, and if you turn right around and say, aha, now I'm beginning to see, right at that same time, it's like you picked up a brand new stick and went, ow! Now make sure you got in this one little spot where you're just looking where you've never seen. In fact, the stick might be too big. You might have to get something like a sharpened needle. You've got to be... The better you get, in a sense, you have to, the more refinement it takes to harm yourself. Not that you can't, but it just takes a bit more finesse. You have to find new weapons by which to lower your consciousness. The old crude ones normally work, but when it gets down to real fine points, usually you got to get little new pieces of little new implements. My list, I thought is that all self-reference reinforces a sensation. But I thought I just started making a quick list. There are other things. It all falls under this heading. Well, I'll leave it to you, but the self-reference reinforces the sensation of duality. But Perhaps they'll give you more fruits and vegetables, and they'll give you maybe an easier entree to make your own salad. Also, here's other things. How long's the fucking list? Oh. I just exaggerating. I stopped. I am not a Baptist minister. Other things that if you therein engage, herein engage, they will reinforce the sensation of duality. All complaints, expressions of self-pity, excuses, explanations, the seeking of approval and reassurance, all replayings of the past, all mental aggressions, all legible inner dialogues, just talking to yourself. And it's a bit wider, but if you can see it, all entertaining of, that is, of you actually listening and getting caught up in, all entertaining of bad news. Which I may at times waste my energy laying on the point of bad news. But if you listen to you, and if you listen to the public marketplace, the verbal public marketplace, and I do not mean just the actual news coming off the print media and from the electronic media, and not just necessarily from other people, but not discounting all that. It is the verbal and mental atmosphere in which man the collective lives. It is permeated. It gets the widest hearing as bad news. And every time you seriously entertain it, anytime, whatever happens, somebody bumps into your car and you get out and you look at it, or you come back and somebody scratched your car in the parking lot, and you come back and you look at it, and somebody walks up behind you in another car, they start to get in, and they see the scratch, they see the dent, and they go, people don't care anymore. People just bump into your car and just drive off. And you entertain that. You understand what I entertain? That is, they say that and you dance with it. Somebody hands you this nice warm pile of shit and you go, oh. I mean, they look at it and they hand it to you by saying, but they're sympathizing with you. They go, well, I mean, is that what the world's coming to? People just bump into your car and drive off, and like they hand it to you to get in their car. They got to go, and you reach out and you take it and say, well, thank you. You entertain the bad news. That is a absolutely reinforcement of the sensation of duality. The duality in you, the duality in life. Do you understand it? That every time you entertain bad news as being a reflection of something real, you are entertaining also. You are reaffirming to yourself, non-verbally and absolutely non-understood, but you are reaffirming to you the duality inherent in life. And not just inherent in life, but that the duality is set up in such a way that one side should win. People should get to the place, or they should get outbred or something, says you as you stand there looking at your car, to where this would not happen. You know, it's a good thing. I mean, assuming you don't like standing there with this warm pile of shit in your hand and seeing your car damaged and seeing just an endless string, if I may say so, not to make you feel bad, but this endless strain of 72 years of periodic bad luck and small tragedies and that is based upon an unanalyzed acceptance that there is a duality going on. But every time that you acquiesce to bad news, every time you express it yourself, every time you complain, every time you look at your car and go, well, I'll be goddamned, you are stating, you are reaffirming the natural duality of life, but you are also, at least tacitly, expressing the belief that in this conflict, one side has got to win. One side is supposed to win. That is the good side, the decent side, the side that looks where they're backing up and does not hit other people's car. The good side of life that does not impose upon me and always bugging me. What could be a greater reinforcement to an illusion than to continue to treat it as though it were real? What could be a better reinforcement of a form of hypochondria than to continually look in the mirror and go, well, I don't care what they say. I am sick. I can tell it. And every time if anybody says, well, you're not sick, you look fine to me, you go, oh no. And you rush back in the bathroom, no, I am. It's not just funny, what better reinforcement? Every time with just such small exceptions, they're not even worth mentioning. But all forms of self-reference, you are reaffirming the duality of life, and you're reaffirming your belief that at least half of life, that is, the duality, is there, and the mindset of the duality, one side is favorable to the other. And you are saying that at least one half of life is unjust. One half of life is yet to catch up. One half of life is yet to reach an acceptable level of civility, of decency. And you can look out there and sure as hell find examples if you're of ordinary mind, but you don't have to. All you got to do is look in you, because there is the father of all dualities. It is the conflict between the old, instinctive, lower nervous system man and the upper, newer, mental nervous system man. It is the natural conflict that is what gives the sensation that I am suffering, that life is just not right. And it's not that this is right and this is wrong. And it's not that this is wrong and this is right. For those of you who might be listening who are believers in the return to the, let's all go live a Rousseau if we could dig him up. The noble savage, it is not that this is right and this is wrong. It's to see where the conflict is and to realize the conflict is natural. As long as man is as he is, there's a conflict. As long as you have dualities, you've got conflict. Remember again that conflict is a horrible misnomer, but not as horrible as others that are commonly used. And I feel it. No, you don't have to thank me. I feel glad that I'm able not to use the more horrible ones. I leave it to you because you use them all the time and you just don't know what you're saying. But at least I did not do it willfully. Sorry. Glad to do it.